You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Steven Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. He is Zach Moreth from the Rebel Walk. He has been out at practice all fall, but there was no viewing today. Although they did meet with the media because of the days, the Grove Day of Collection or whatever that is. There were some things to talk about. Anyway, Zach, all that's pretty much left for Ole Miss before the Furman game and before Furman prep is actually a real thing is just a mock game. So my question is, what are the things that stood out to you in this edition of fall camp?
Yeah, Steven, I think the first thing that's going to be really important in that game is maintaining health all across the board. And that starts with guys, especially like Jordan Watkins and Juice Wells, who we haven't seen a ton of. They've been a little banged up, kind of recovering from injury throughout fall camp. Both of them are in pads, but also in black jerseys and not participating in live drills. So, you want to maintain guys like that who are supposed to be starters, especially in the trenches, guys like Walter Nolan, Jared Ivory, Princely Uman who's still recovering. But I do think it's important that, you do have in this mock game a lot of competition because we're getting really close, man. And it's time to start figuring out who's going to be those true ones and true twos heading into week one. Obviously against Furman, Middle Tennessee, all those guys, you have time to sort that out. But, Lane's looking to get more comfortable with who are going to be his guys heading into the first game of the season for sure.
Yeah, and we all know that a mock game, and everybody's going to hear the phrase mock game over the course of the next week. A mock game is basically about everything other than the football. So they want to make sure there's 11 players on the field ready to go in every possible situation of the game. The coaches that are up in the press box, we'll talk about that in just a second. And all of the stuff that is outside, this is kind of the practice round for Ole Miss football. I participated in 2 or 3 mock games during my time at Ole Miss, and it was video-wise, I have no idea why we videoed it because it didn't really matter, but it was a very, very important because the first game, you'll see it. It will happen. I guarantee you it will happen. You'll look out there on a field goal unit or a punt unit or some sort of sudden change type situation, and there'll be 10 players on the field or 12 players on the field. That always happens.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, that is what these mock games are supposed to basically do away with. Now, you talked about receivers. You talked about all of these people in black jerseys. And Lane Kiffin talked about in the press conference on Monday that the wide receiver unit are banged up. Now, do we think the wide receiver unit is really banged up, or are they just being overly cautious on that unit?
That's the thing, Steven. People have to understand they're being very cautious, especially for a guy like Juice Wells, who really didn't play a whole lot at all last year. He's coming back from a major, I think it was foot, Steven.
Foot.
Something along those lines. But the last thing you want to do is rush Juice Wells because unlike last year, you're not playing Tulane and Alabama early in the season. Like, you don't have those big marquee matchups. So you have time to kind of adjust yourself. And again, Juice is running routes. He's just not going live. And that's the last thing you want to do is get a guy like Juice Wells hurt in camp. And the same applies for Jordan Watkins, especially because those are presumably 2 of your starting wide receivers. And it also helps when you have guys like Aiden Williams and Caden Lee waiting, going into their sophomore year, and they can fill in, they can step up right away, especially in practice, and give a good test to those DBs. But yeah, to answer your question, Steven, there's really no main concern for me. It's just being cautious. And that's why if they don't play a lot during Furman, fans should not freak out. Things are okay. They just want to make sure things are in the right spot before these guys are full go.
Yeah, I tell people all the time on my podcast, Lane Kiffin is preparing for a 16-game football season.
Yes. And that's what people have to understand. And you see it, and he said it, they were practicing hard like 2 to 3 times a week versus in years prior, it's like 4, 5, or 6, So they're taking it easier. They're trying to scale it back because if Ole Miss hopefully gets into this 12-team playoff, their guys are going to be more rested than other teams, and that's what Lane's going for. So it's exciting.
Yeah, we've come a long way from Ed Orgeron at Ole Miss having a
Yeah.
100-play scrimmage and the Wake Forest weather break because a hurricane was flying over. We've come a long way as far as taking care of the body since that.
100%. And that's going to be, you're going to see it in other programs, these coaches who probably are going a little harder than they need to in August. We've seen, not that this has any correlation, but Texas has lost 2 of their running backs. Injuries they're very frequent nowadays. So you have to do everything you can to protect that, especially when you have so much talent on this Ole Miss team.
Yeah, and the most important thing for Lane Kiffin is this has to work. If he has to win. If he wins, other people will copy it. If not, everybody will ridicule and keep doing what they're doing.
Exactly.
That's just the way this works. Now, I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Ibotta. But before then, when we come back, we will talk about the day of collections, some of the storylines that dropped around there. We'll talk about that with Zach when we come back. But it's summertime, which means it is barbecue season. So stock up on all of your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibotta. You won't have to choose between burgers and hot dogs. You can just get both. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You earn hundreds of dollars on items from groceries to beauty supplies to even toys. So you can even make sure you're beating inflation no matter how you're purchasing. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. It's time you join the over 50 million users who use Ibotta to earn cash back every time they shop. That's right. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta and using the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKEDONCollege. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel recently. It's America's #1 sports book, so of course we're going to talk about it. But they're doing something a little bit different for you right now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket for your YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season game on Sunday afternoon of out-of-market games. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Maybe you want to bet on Ole Miss and their over-under of 9.5 wins this season, or Jaxson Dart at plus 1,500 to win the Heisman, or heck, Ole Miss at plus 1,500 to win the national title. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Zach, Monday was the Ole Miss day of collection, I guess it's called, the Grove Collective. I think they call it the day of collection. And they interviewed coaches, and they had basically a live stream that went throughout the day. A year ago, the one that they did last year raised like $3 million in 5 days or something like that. So it's a pretty good thing for the Grove Collective. But the important thing that we get out of it is actually Ole Miss fans' second opportunity to hear from coordinators. You have Charlie Weiss and Pete Golding. You think you have them once. This was an opportunity to hear them again. And Charlie Weiss Jr., a little bit farther on in fall camp, the real main takeaway from him is the fact that he's starting to like this technology situation of offensive coaching. He has seen some bells and whistles and ways to use it and exactly what Jaxson Dart can handle. I think this is a pretty big deal.
It's a massive deal, Steven. You can tell Charlie, he gets a little geeked up when he's talking about this stuff because he's in the booth, and I think he's a guy who really has a deep understanding of, different coverages and what the defense is going to do. So when he's able to communicate that to Jaxson, it's scary, 100%. And then you take into account that now instead of looking at the sideline every play and going to get his signal, Jaxson is able to focus on how the defense is setting up. He's able to push his guys, help everyone move a little faster, and get that tempo going somehow even faster than how it already is. And it's exciting, man. I'm excited just talking about it.
Yeah, they can go absolutely warp speed this year, but they also have the talent to where that they wanted to, they could slow it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this offense, it might look a little bit different than it has. There's going to be 20 to 20, 20-yard line to 20-yard line tempo, and this offense is going to operate that way because that's the way they operate. But whenever Ole Miss needs goal line, whenever Ole Miss needs short yardage, when Ole Miss needs 4-minute offense, I think Ole Miss is going to be able to slow it down a little bit. And they're going to be, as I call it, less reliant on the tempo gimmick. They're going to be more like what Alabama and Georgia have been, to where there is nothing that they do special on offense because it doesn't matter.
And honestly, Steven, I think sometimes that change is needed, especially if the offense is even struggling in that tempo offense. Sometimes you need to slow things down because if the defense gets in a rhythm going against tempo, it makes things really easy. And then it's 3 and out, or on the second drive, you're out. So I do enjoy that aspect. I'm excited to see. Hopefully you're right on that. I'd love to see him do that. My question for you, Steven, is how do you think, so we're playing in Death Valley, it's going to be hectic. How easy or hard do you think it'll be for Jaxson to be able to hear that communication in his helmet on the road?
I think it'll be easier for him to communicate with the coaches in the helmet because he can just put the hand over the ear hole, so to speak, to block out the noise. I think that'll be easier than him trying to communicate with outside wide receivers the way they were.
Yes.
But as Lane Kiffin said, all of this, they're going to give the play call in Jackson's hair, but they're going to do the operation in case for some reason the technology don't work like they always did. So I think with a redundancy in the communications, it should be easier to play in places like Death Valley.
That's my hope. And, if it ends up working out, it takes that so much stress away from the offense. It's going to be hectic on the road at South Carolina and LSU, and those are going to be two of Ole Miss' toughest games. So if you can have that kind of factor out of the equation for Jaxson Dart in the offense, I think things are going to look even better getting off the bus.
The other thing that came out of the day of collection was Pete Golding announcing just willy-nilly, really, that he's going to be in the press conference in 2024. And everybody's like, whoa, he's a sideline guy. That's the way he's always coached his entire career. And I do agree with that. I think he's comfortable with that. But with the technology on defense, he wants to be in a place to where he's sitting down looking at a laptop or at a tablet and all of that, trying to figure out what's going on in between series so he can quickly relay information. With the advent of B. Brown, with Zach Arnett on this staff, I don't think it's that important that Pete Golding is on the sideline. I think it's important that Pete Golding is wherever he can get the most out of this technology and the most out of his defense, and that might be in the press box. We'll see. Now, if it doesn't work early on, like if in Furman or MTSU, there's not a rule that says he has to stay up there. But Ole Miss starting out there, that just kind of makes sense with the early part of the schedule.
100%, Steven. And you mentioned it, but it really goes to speak on this defensive staff. You got Arnett out there, Joe Judge, who's been around the NFL forever, Brown coaching the DBs, Randall Joyner. Pete has so much trust in all of these guys. And I think it's exciting for Pete to finally join Charlie up there. It's a completely different perspective. And again, you can break down the game a little easier because you're constantly looking at film or reviewing the past drive. It's something that was probably a little more difficult to do with Pete on the sideline because he's constantly interacting with guys and interacting with other coaches. So to make his job even easier, I think you're immediately going to see improvements from him, especially when communicating and adjusting throughout the game with his team.
Now, I was a former video guy at Ole Miss. That was my thing, video, in like 2005, 2006. It petrifies me at the thought of knowing that somebody is probably going to have to do something and get the personnel grouping. The task of getting these tablets ready to go is not just the video. You're going to find that there's going to be people that, I don't know what the rule is, but you're going to have to talk about personnel grouping on formation. They're basically breaking down the game in real time. I'm kind of curious to see exactly how that would look for Ole Miss football, because that is the side of this that I think of on the technology, is what's going to have to be done to the tablets and be ready for the coaches for them to break down essentially the film in real time.
No, that's actually a great point. It's interesting to hear your perspective on that, being that you actually did that too, Steven, because I know even they have some students cutting up film on recruits and stuff like that. So do you put your trust in students to be cutting up game film as the game is going on? Like, I'm
No,
curious to see.
it would be GAs
Okay.
likely that are trying, because the ones that are in the press box, just by the way, that one part of the responsibility for the graduate assistants during the game is to chart what is going on of each formations.
Okay.
So whatever they're charting will probably just be inputted into some type of a system or something like that.
Perfect.
So
yeah,
but it will be interesting, the time crunch and what they're able to actually do. That's the kind of stuff that I'm really interesting about. I am so glad that I do not have to deal with this.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, hey,
all of a sudden it's a new type of pressure, like for a guy who really hasn't done much, or a guy who doesn't think they have a big role. Like you said, a GA. Now it's like, oh, we got to get this in, or he's gonna be pissed off.
And now they have analysts, so it might be analysts doing something, stuff like that as well. I mean, the setup that Ole Miss could have, and like I said, I'm not 100% sure of what the rules will look like, but I do believe that you can have tablets and have people inside and outside of your facility breaking it down, which means there's going to be a person basically breaking down real time in the facility, and it kind of goes out to everybody.
Okay. That's incredible.
I'm curious to see exactly how this works. We haven't heard anything about this in the last 6 months, other than the fact that it was going to be a thing. What the actual operation is, what the standard operating procedure to get the plays to the coaches in between the series, that's going to be the stuff that I'm interested in from this. Because we know that Pete Golding, we know that Charlie Weiss is going to be able to see this going on. By the way, Charlie Weiss has a photographic memory. So now he watches these plays and all that. He famously read Lane Kiffin's credit card number and then the next day repeated it back to him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So him and looking at film and doing this, it's going to basically be impossible to fool Jaxson Dart if you're a defensive player. But I'm curious to all of this operation that's going to happen, and we'll see. I mean, we're a couple of weeks away, so we'll see. But I am curious if anybody's actually going to ask the question of what the operation for that is.
That's definitely one that I'll be thinking about in the next press conference, Steven, because again, it's the little things off the field now with all this technology that are going to make or break games. So and I'm hoping it works in Ole Miss' favor. But again, I do love Golden being up top, and hopefully that works out for him as well.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And thank you to the everydayers and insiders who make the show what it is. Zach Moreth from the Rebel Walk. What have you got going on at the Rebel Walk this week, bud?
Yeah, we're same old, Steven. We're tuning into a couple more practices. Hopefully we see Juice Wells and Jordan Watkins out of those black jerseys. But other than that, we're counting down the days to Furman, man. I'm really looking forward to it.
All right. Take care of yourself. And hey, I know school's getting ready to start back up. So get ramped up for that too.
Unfortunately, I just have to start locking in soon, man. Thank you, Steven.
All right. Take care, bub.